next presentation is Michele Konschuh. She is a researcher, a potato researcher at the University of Lethbridge. She worked for Alberta Agriculture and Forestry for many years and has transferred over to the University of Lethbridge. And she's going to be looking at potato research here in southern Alberta. And I will share her presentation with you now.
Okay, I'd like to thank Farming Smarter for the opportunity to talk to you today about our variety evaluation approach for potatoes in Alberta. I'll give you a bit of history to start with. In around 1979, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada took over potato breeding responsibilities at the national level. Alberta Agriculture at that time committed to conduct regional variety evaluations, including storage and culinary assessments, and to support the federal breeding program with agronomy, post-harvest, and pest control studies. Since that time, regional variety testing has been conducted in Alberta, typically at the Crop Diversification Centre South in Brooke, and for quite a while at the Crop Diversification Centre North in Edmonton. There was significant support from the province until about 2002. At that time, support began to erode. Regional evaluations are now funded through a combination of research grants, support from the industry, and the Potato Growers of Alberta. And attracting funding is a bit of a challenge for this type of work because of the ongoing nature of the trial. Variety development was identified at the provincial and national levels in priority setting meetings organized by the Canadian Hort Council in 2012. Potato Growers of Alberta also held a roundtable research discussion in 2013 and confirmed that variety development was a priority in Alberta as well. Industry also still identifies variety improvement as a key priority. So this current project is part of a national project with funding from the Growing Forward Science Cluster. And as I mentioned, also industry support and support from PTA. And currently the trial is being conducted by Lethbridge College, who now has operating responsibility for the research farms in Brooks and in Lethbridge. And the college works with Alberta Agriculture and the university to ensure that the current trials are completed. For those of you who are less familiar with the potato industry in Alberta, Alberta is a producer of high quality processing potatoes. And in fact, we have 3 French fry processing facilities in southern Alberta, Lamb Weston, which is near Purple Springs, the McCain plant near Coaldale or Chin, and then Cavendish has a plant in Lethbridge. We also process potato chips in the province. Old Dutch Foods has a processing plant near Calgary, and Frito-Lay has a processing plant in Taber. Alberta is also a source of high-quality seed potato for domestic use and export. In fact, Alberta is the largest seed exporter in Canada, and our seed is used domestically to produce other potato crops. It also sold within Canada and into the US, especially the Pacific Northwest, and we export to other countries as well. Alberta is also a producer of unique potatoes for the specialty market, and you might be familiar with the Little Potato Company, who markets potatoes for the fresh market, but in unique shapes and sizes. We also have table potatoes produced and marketed by a number of other firms. Edmonton Potato Growers markets their table potatoes under the Canada Goose label. The Zano Growers markets table potatoes in the province. Prairie Gold markets potatoes in the province, and a number of Hutterite colonies also market fresh market potatoes. In Vauxhall, we also have a dehydration facility for potatoes, and the facility makes a high quality potato granule that's used in the snack food market. So in Alberta, our approach to variety evaluation trials differs from that in other areas, in that in order to get these trials conducted, we needed to pool our resources. So we pool resources from a number of sources, and we evaluate potential potato varieties from public and private breeding programs, and also imports from other countries, using a cooperative approach. This allows us to use an economy of scale to keep the costs realistic for smaller industry participants. So for industry groups that have a small number of potato varieties, or they have a limited market, the cost can be shared with a number of other industry participants to ensure that they don't have to bear the entire cost of the trial themselves. The other advantage of working with industry participants is that this external participation ensures that our trials are relevant. And then we can use funds, leveraging funds, to provide opportunities to evaluate other material. So in particular, potato growers in Alberta provide funds, and those funds are leveraged to get Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada trials evaluated locally. An example of the kinds of material that are in the evaluation trial in any given year, this is the 2021 trial year. The Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada breeding program material includes 22 French fry entries this year, 8 shipping entries, and 7 fresh market entries. And you can see by the breakdown of varieties in the trial that they are recognizing that Alberta has a large processing industry here, and they are entering varieties suitable for that mix. We also have 40 creamer potato varieties in the trial this year in categories of yellow skin, yellow flesh, red or purple skinned, and then fingerling and specialty varieties. Our other industry entries include 23 potato lines entered at a moderate rate of nitrogen and 21 entered at a low rate of nitrogen. And these include 9 fresh market varieties, 7 chippers, and 7 French fry varieties. Our current industry participation includes the potato growers of Alberta, whose funding is leveraged if they don't look at varieties directly. The French fry processor Lamb Weston is participating in the trial, and we're working with Lamb Weston to ensure that the data we generate allows them to make good business decisions. We also work with a number of potato variety developers. Rocky View Seed Potatoes and Edmonton Potato Growers both evaluate varieties for potential uptake in the Alberta market, and they're located in Alberta. Tuberosum Technologies is based in Saskatchewan, but does release varieties into our market as well. And Real Potatoes is based out of New Brunswick. Additional players are Fresh Packers, Edmonton Potato Growers, and the Little Potato Company, which markets creamer potatoes. We have one potato chip processor, which is Old Dutch Foods, who enters varieties into the trial. And Old Dutch has successfully launched a number of varieties that have come through the breeding program, through our trials, and out to industry. And we have an open invitation to others. So if you are interested in potato variety evaluation and you'd like to participate, you can get in touch, and we have developed mechanisms to include people in the trial even midstream. In terms of trial design, potatoes are planted in blocks according to fertility, spacing requirements, and time of harvest. At this time, the trials are being conducted at CDC South in Brook, where they have been traditionally conducted. This may change in the future depending on the amount of support that we're able to get from the provincial government. The blocks of potatoes typically include a full nitrogen block, and that would be suitable for French fry varieties. We usually also include a moderate nitrogen and a low nitrogen block to allow industry participants to evaluate the response to nitrogen fertilizer of each of these new varieties. Obviously, the industry is looking for varieties that are more nitrogen fertilizer efficient, and sometimes we get the same yield out of a moderate and a low nitrogen block, and that allows them to make decisions about the agronomy required for the trial. In-row spacing is varied depending on the end use of the potatoes as well. So in-row spacing for French fry varieties is usually 30 centimeters apart, whereas chippers and fresh market varieties can be grown anywhere from 20 to 30 centimeters apart, depending on the client needs. And in-row spacing for creamers is much tighter at 15 centimeters between plants. Participants are encouraged to provide information to us regarding the proposed harvest date to ensure that the majority of potatoes harvested are in a desirable size class. And so we don't want to miss the harvest window for some of those potato varieties. Within each block, potatoes are planted in a randomized complete block design. And on the outer rows of each block, we plant guard potatoes. And for some lines, we also plant guard potatoes on the beginning and end of each row to ensure that every potato has a neighbor, and that has an influence on the outcome and size. But also the guard potatoes protect some of the trial rows from potential mechanical damage, wind damage, any irrigation events that might go awry, and also from sometimes insects and disease and vegetation. To give you an idea how we plant the trial, this is our tuber unit planter. This is not how industry plants potatoes. But the tuber unit planter allows us to plant individual rows of a particular variety. It does have adjustable spacing, so we have a zero mat that's been added to the planter to allow us to adjust spacing from 15 to 30 or 15 to 60 centimeters between plants by spinning a dial rather than getting off and moving sprockets around. This allows us very accurate placement of limited quantities of seed. So because these seed are coming from breeding programs, often the seed is in limited supply and we have to be able to count for every plant, and we want the spacing to be accurate so that there's no misses because that will affect our yield outcome. After the potatoes are planted, we go through a power hilling step, and power hilling is kind of like a rototiller and a shaper. It allows us to form larger hills. You'll notice that they're flat tops on top of the hill to try to collect more moisture when we irrigate. We try to provide a nice loose soil bed for the tubers to form daughter tubers in. The other great advantage when you have manual labor is that power hilling assists us with early season weed control, and it also allows us to incorporate top dress fertilizer if we need to add fertilizer at this stage for some of our clients. In terms of irrigation, at CDC South, we now have a low pressure lateral system, and this is very similar in terms of how it delivers water to the pivot systems that industry uses. This low pressure lateral system in this picture is oriented kind of across the rows, and after 2016, we oriented it with the rows, and that allows us to differentially irrigate different parts of the field or different trials. Potatoes typically like light, frequent irrigation that allows us to grow a better quality crop. And this is an Ag Canada plot in the picture here, and you can see different varieties flower and a clear difference within the trial. So there's 4 replicates of each in that picture. And to schedule our irrigation events, we have been using the Washington State University Irrigation Scheduler app. And that app takes into account our soil type, our local weather, and local ET data for our crop to determine how quickly the crop is likely to use moisture and when an irrigation event is next needed. So we found that quite useful, and I can monitor irrigation and make recommendations even though I'm not in Brooks right now. In terms of in-season data collection, we collect emergence data for each client. Typically, that's the time at which 50% of the plants have emerged, or when 100% of the plants have emerged, or sometimes both. We also record the stand, or how many plants came up out of the potatoes we planted. And for some clients, we also do a stem count, which is labor intensive, but good information for certain evaluations. Upon request, we also collect time of flowering information, or we supply demo rows that can be poked around in by industry clients. We have hosted client tours when there's not a pandemic. We can sample demo rows for tuber size. Also, we can sample for glycoalkaloids and sugar content. And sometimes within the trial, we do petiole nitrogen samples or pre-harvest samples for clients as well. For post-harvest data collection, the data is often determined by the end-use category. So each end-use of potatoes requires different information on which to base decisions. Standards are provided for each end-use category, and additional checks can be supplied by clients if they have a particular variety they'd like to compare their material to. Tubers are provided upon request back to the clients after data collection to facilitate further evaluation, and this includes storage tests, bruise testing, culinary evaluation, disease resistance screening, glycoalkaloid testing, sugar analyses, and market acceptability. So by end-use category, we'll talk about each one. The French fry cultivars have different requirements for end-use evaluations than some of the other categories. French fry cultivars, you'll note, are kind of oblong and blocky, and that's deliberate. We want to be able to make as many fries out of them as possible. If they could make rectangular potatoes, that might work out even better for them. If the potatoes are really large, sometimes they cut them in half and make French fries out of both halves. So certainly shape is an important characteristic. Also, with French fry varieties, we categorize them by weight. So we typically class them into sizes of under 4 ounce, 4 to 6 ounce, 6 to 10 ounce, and over 10 ounce sizes. Anything over 4 ounce is considered a marketable yield in our trial. And we do make note of the deformed tubers. And a deformed tuber in this category is anything where at least 10% of the tuber is deformed and would impair its ability to be used to make French fries. Based on that information, we can calculate the average tuber weight and the percent by size category. We also measure specific gravity. Specific gravity is an indirect measurement of fry color and frying quality. So higher specific gravity generally means that the fries take on less oil and are crispier. We take a subsample of the marketable tubers to look for internal defects, such as hollow heart and vascular discoloration. And we look at a subsample as well for external diseases like scab and black spot. For chipping cultivars, you'll note that even though they're also a processing variety, the shape is very different. For chipping cultivars, we're looking for round, very uniform crop, typically a little on the smaller side. Standards for chipping cultivars, we include Atlantic as an early season variety, and the full season varieties usually included. Typically, the last few years it's been bigger, but we have included Snowden and other varieties in the past. For chipping cultivars, we categorize them again into size categories, but this time by diameter rather than by weight. So anything under 48 millimeters is small. 48 to 88 millimeters is the sweet spot for a chipping variety, and over 88 millimeters is awfully large. We do take out deformed tubers for this as well, and we do calculate yield and number in each of these categories, and we can calculate average tuber size. Specific gravity is measured on chipping cultivars as well. Again, it's an indirect measurement of fry quality, and chip scores can also be determined using a Hunter colorimeter with the help of a food evaluation lab. Hunter colorimeter measures the lightness of the chip as well as hues of red and green, which would affect its appearance. Some of the chipping cultivars are put into storage trials, and these storage trials determine how long the cultivar can make great chips coming out of storage, and whether or not it has a dormancy, a long or short dormancy. We also take a subsample to look at internal defects with these ones, and that includes hollow heart, brown center, vascular discoloration, and things like that. And we take samples to look at external disease situations like scab and black spot. And in the chipping cultivars, we also make note of how many tubers green. So lighter skinned cultivars or thinner skinned cultivars have a tendency to turn green when exposed to light. And as you know, if you've had a potato chip with a green edge, sometimes they taste bitter. So the industry certainly is curious about which varieties are susceptible to greening before they introduce new varieties. Fresh market cultivars are different again. The fresh market cultivars, appearance is a really important feature. So they want tubers that look nice. They also have good skin finish and a nice shape. We normally put standards in the fresh market trial that include Norland as a fresh market red, Yukon Gold as a fresh market yellow, and Russet North Dakota as a fresh market russet or baked potato type. These are sort of graded into similar categories to the chipping varieties by diameter, where under 48 millimeters in diameter is considered small, 48 to 88 is a marketable, and over 88 we call jumbo, those are large potatoes. We do take out the deformed, and for some clients, we will categorize them by weight, depending on the client needs. So for Russet North Dakota, for instance, weight categories are more appropriate because these are sold for baked potatoes and they're counted into boxes based on size. Again, we measure specific gravity of these tubers, and in this case, it's not for fry quality, but it is an indication of mouthfeel and their texture when boiled or baked. We do take a subsample for internal defects. We also look for external defects such as scab and black spot, and we do make note of green, especially on the yellow flesh varieties, which might be more predisposed to turning green near the soil surface. Bake and boil samples can be taken as well, and with the help of the culinary assessment lab, we can determine the texture after cooking, fluffing after cooking darkening, which is a graying of the potato, and sometimes taste. So it's food, it seems surprising that taste is one of the last things we look at, but for the fresh market variety, it is important. Creamer potatoes are graded a little differently. creamers are so unique that the standards are provided by the client. In the pictures here, you can see a purple skinned, purple flesh variety. You can see a red skinned white flesh and a yellow skinned yellow flesh. But we also sometimes have tubers in the trial that are purple skinned yellow flesh or red skinned yellow flesh. And we have had striped and polka dotted potatoes, which is kind of interesting. Also, the shape differs. Many of these are round in the picture, but we also have fingerling shapes, which are more oblong. So for this, for creamer evaluations, we do plant them in blocks by color or shape category as the client requests, and then we grade within each of those blocks. Again, we take the yield and number of tubers in each category. Tubers under 25 millimeters are considered very small. 25 to 41 are a creamer size or a marketable size, and over 41 are quite large. You'll note that over 41 is still smaller than what's considered small in a regular fresh market. So the varieties that are grown for creamer potato market and for fresh market potatoes are very different. These ones set high numbers and produce mature small tubers, whereas with the other varieties, you could harvest them small, but you wouldn't get the yield that's required to make that economical. We do evaluate specific gravity in these creamer potatoes as well, again, as an indirect measure of mouthfeel and cooking quality. And some of the samples are provided for culinary analyses at a professional kitchen. So the variety trial that we conduct in Alberta is using a value chain approach, where we start with material from breeding programs or introductions from other countries in regional tests. From the data that we get from those regional tests, they move forward to be sponsored by industry. So we're a host site for industry evaluation, either coming out of the accelerated release from the federal breeding program or from breeding programs from other locations. And industry has a chance to look at the material at our location without risking anything on their farm. So we're better equipped to do the small trials. And because we don't sell seed or market potatoes, if there's anything that may have a higher disease load, it's not going to affect the rest of our farm. We then have some industry participants carry on with trials where they look at fertility or spacing or maturity in sort of pre-commercial agronomic assessment. So because we look at everything from the time it's introduced from the breeding program until it's time to be accepted by industry and put into production field, we can kind of work with people at many different steps, and we try to give them answers to various questions along the way. That's kind of what I wanted to tell you about the variety trial. And I think I want to present a little on a new project that we have coming up, so we'll hold questions till the end.
All right, Michelle, are you on the call? I think we had decided yesterday you were going to answer any questions that arose from this first presentation now, and otherwise we can save the rest of the questions for later.
I'm on the call.
Perfect. Does anyone have any questions regarding the first part of Michelle's presentation? Okay, nobody's raising their hand, turning their cameras on, nobody's typing anything. All right, I guess we'll continue on with the second part of the presentation here, and then we'll do some questions at the end.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'd like to change course a little bit and talk to you about using agronomy, biocontrol, and outreach to reduce black-legged potatoes. So this is a new project that we attracted funding for from the new provincial funding agency, Results Driven Agricultural Research. The project is a 3-year project from this year to 2024, and I'm working with colleagues out of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Dr. Jonathan Nielsen and Dr. Larry Pochak, to look at black-legged potato and to see if we can reduce the impact of that disease on the potato industry in the province. So we have an OMAFA image here showing blackleg, which is just the dark discoloration of the stem caused by a bacteria that will eventually cause the plant to fail. Blackleg is bacteria, a bacterial cause in potato, which is different from blackleg of canola, which is fungal. So although the names are the same, they're very different organisms in each crop. Blackleg of potato in Alberta is caused by Pectobacterium species, and there are a number of species that are present in the potato crop. It's considered ubiquitous. Most potato soils have some blackleg present, and so there is a risk of blackleg introduction anywhere that you grow potatoes. However, blackleg is one of those diseases that expresses differently depending on the environmental conditions. So even though blackleg may be present, it may be present at a level that doesn't express itself, or you may need different environmental conditions such as a cool, wet spring in order for blackleg to express itself. As such, it's a bit of a sleeper and a little bit tougher to work with. Blackleg, because it's bacterial, also is not going to be helped with any fungal or seed treatment application. And there is no appetite by PMRA to register antibiotic type seed treatment. So we have to come up with other approaches. In this project, we wanted to look at a multi-pronged approach. So one of the things we want to do is gather all of the information we can on best management practices to reduce the risk of blackleg in the crop, and then provide that information back to producers. So although maybe quite a bit is known, we don't know how much the growers here know about what can be done. So we like to kind of gather that information and provide it back to them in a format that they can put into practice. We also want to collect samples and characterize the causal organisms for blackleg in Alberta. So samples come in periodically to the Lethbridge Research Center, and Larry's asked to check samples out routinely. To my knowledge, all of the samples that have been coming in on blackleg in Alberta are Pectobacterium samples, and we don't have the presence yet of any Dipea organisms, which is a causal organism of blackleg in other countries, and considered to be potentially more aggressive. So far it's all Pectobacterium, and we want to be able to collect samples and characterize them to determine which species of Pectobacterium are causing blackleg in Alberta right now. One of the things that we would find useful is in-field diagnostic tools, and right now there are none available. So we would like to see if we could develop some tools, either imaging tools where we look at reflectance or visual light spectrum to see if we can determine a healthy from a non-healthy plant, and better yet, if we could determine a plant suffering from blackleg versus another disease. Also, there are tools for other diseases that use lateral flow techniques, kind of like a pregnancy strip test, where you could mush up part of the plant and put a stick into it and then allow it to change color. And so what we would like is to develop something like that to determine whether or not blackleg is present in the crop, and also perhaps which species it is. At this time, blackleg is visually inspected for by Canadian Field Inspection Agency, and CFIA just uses the visual method. There is no diagnostic method for them to grade the seed crop, and yet because it's a regulated disease by CFIA, the percentage of blackleg will change whether or not your seed can be used as seed and whether it can be downgraded. So there is a big potential impact on potato seed growers of finding blackleg in the field, and we'd like to make sure that what they're finding is in fact caused by the Pectobacterium organism. In addition, we might want to try some diagnostics for use in storage, and that may include sensors, electronic noses, which pick up different volatile molecules that are given off by rotting potato tissue. Our noses aren't sensitive enough to tell what's causing the rot, just that they don't smell very good. But some of the electronic nose equipment might be able to differentiate the organism that's causing the disease. I mentioned that we have a biocontrol angle as well. And one way of introducing biocontrol organisms is to use naturally occurring organisms that are already present. So bacteriophage are viruses of bacteria, and bacteriophage-specific regional blackleg strains have been isolated by Dr. Putz lab in the past. these bacteriophage organisms can impair the ability to blackleg to cause infection by potatoes, and so they can kind of knock back the disease potential. And so we want to use some of the strains collected and characterized in Alberta, and also evaluate those for the presence of bacteriophage, which may be an inherent biocontrol mechanism. Also, potatoes can be introduced to endophyte organisms. Endophytes are bacteria and fungi that live within the plant cells that can actually confer disease resistance. And you may have heard of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is a type of endophyte that's been known to help plants remain healthy and vigorous. And there are also some bacteria that can live within the plant that don't cause disease. So in the same way that our intestines have good bugs and bad bugs make us sick. Good bugs can help us actually uptake minerals and nutrients better. We have organisms that live within us in a friendly way, and that's what an endophyte does in a plant. So we'd like to try introducing endophytes to see if we could reduce disease susceptibility to the blackleg organism. And then we want to be able to track that as well in the plant to see how long that benefit is held on to by the plant. We'd also like to test some agronomic approaches. So there's some information that we found that shows that calcium applications in a field might reduce the incidence of blackleg. And we have some anecdotal stories that tell us if we mix some hydrogen peroxide compounds in the nutrition provided in a pivot, that we can knock back blackleg in field as well. So we'd like to try some of these approaches to see if any of them are useful in Alberta, and if they are tools that the growers could potentially put into practice. Our current industry participants on this project include firms that were willing to provide in-kind support in the form of samples and seed potatoes. French fry processors at this time include Lamb Weston and Cavendish Farms. Potato chip processors include Old Dutch Foods. Seed potato firms include Alberta Seed Producers Inc., which is a cooperative of seed growers, and Edmonton Potato Growers, who is another cooperative of growers. And we do have an open invitation to others. So if there's other participants who would like to get involved in the project, you're welcome to contact us to provide in-kind support and or funding. In 2021, what we plan to go forward this year, we've been a little slowed down by the pandemic, but what we can do is collect blackleg samples. So we're going to collect blackleg samples from seed growers, agronomists, and also producers. We will have those samples processed to the point where we can characterize them, and then we can carry on with those. We want to spend this year as well to do some method development. So it sounds strange, but one of the things we need to be able to do is consistently make a potato stick with blackleg. So we need to determine our best method for introducing blackleg organisms into a potato plant, so that we can then tell if we're making inroads with some of our solutions. We also want to find a source of endophytes, and there are some firms selling endophytes in Canada, and one in fact that produces endophytes right here in Alberta that we're going to approach about working with in our blackleg project. We also want to develop methods to introduce endophytes into the potato plant, and then spend some time figuring out how many generations we can pass that endophyte on. So is it passed from a parent to a daughter tuber? And if we replant those daughter tubers, does it accept and plant again? And for how many generations? So we have to be able to introduce the endophyte and also detect it within the plant material later on. And we want to work on blackleg detection using our imaging and sensors, as I mentioned. So imaging such as handheld reflectance sensors or drone-based cameras or GoPros. We want to see if we can detect visual symptoms, or detect the disease before visual symptoms are present, and if we can differentiate healthy from diseased plants and from disease from another. We also want to work with some sensors to detect volatile associated with blackleg in storages. And we want to see if we can screen feedlots and if we can reduce the turnaround, so that if a producer is bringing a feedlot to his farm, we could determine the risk of blackleg disease in that feedlot and get him information before planting, so that he can make better informed decisions. If you're wondering how to get involved this year, one way to get involved is to provide blackleg samples. These can be dropped off at the Lethbridge Research Center in Lethbridge, or just outside of Lethbridge, but you need to let Larry or Jonathan or myself know so that we can have somebody take care of the samples when they arrive. Or you can arrange for sample pickup and you can contact me to have me pick up samples from you. You can provide feedback on the project. We'd like to know what questions you have about blackleg and potato, and also we'd like to know if you've tried anything and what works or does not work for you, so that we can maybe incorporate questions into our studies. And then consider cooperating. We will need cooperating growers to test defensive solutions, and we will need people to test info diagnostics, and we will need people to attend installation sessions. So if you would like to get involved, those are some ways that you can get involved in the trial. That's my contact information, and I'd be happy to take questions now.
All right. So thank you, Michelle, for that very interesting presentation on potato research. Does anyone have any questions? I see Lee has one in the chat. Is blackleg and potato crops a problem every year for Alberta potato growers, and what's the economic impact?
Okay, so no, blackleg is, although it's present, it's not a problem every year in the potato crop. Often it's aggravated by weather conditions. So blackleg tends to express or have a bigger expression in the crop if we have a cool, wet spring. And seed potato can start to decay, and that decay can travel up the stem and cause a blackening in the stem tissue, which eventually will cause the death of the plant. So it's certainly not every year. The economic impact varies a lot. For a seed grower, the impact is a lot higher, because if there's much blackleg in their crop, their seed can be downgraded. So they won't get as much for the crop. It has to be sold at a different class of seed, or it may be prevented from being certified at all. And for commercial growers, it's kind of one of those aggravating diseases that shows up and it steals some of your yield. So it's a little stealthy. It's not a massive problem in commercial crops, but it is sort of consistently a risk. And because it's considered to be brought in with seed potato, we're working with the seed growers primarily to try to reduce the risk of the disease coming in on the seed tubers so that we don't have the problem at commercial levels.
Okay, so he's also asking if it's naturally occurring in the soil so it can always be present, or is it like clubroot in that once you got it, you're kind of stuck with it?
As I mentioned, it's understood to be kind of transmitted by seed. However, because we have a flush through system in potatoes where potatoes start from disease-free tissue culture material and go through a protected phase in the greenhouse, clearly if it's introduced after that, it must be somewhat present in soil or on potato relatives. So it is considered ubiquitous and naturally occurring. There are different strains. There are also some dangerous strains that aren't in Alberta yet, and that includes Dickia species. And so we would like to prevent Dickia from coming to the province because it would be a little bit more damaging. But so it's not like clubroot in that it's sort of present and will kind of remain there all the time. I do believe it needs a potato relative as a host, so it might be possible to eradicate it, but it is considered ubiquitous, so it's in all potato soils at this time that we know of.
Okay, fantastic. Scott, you have your hand up.
Okay, you're able to hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So my question is about whether there's any looking at whether some particular cover crops might help those the microbes that I guess instead of applying endophytes, is there any cover crops or potential in that where they could be growing in advance or even with kind of on the hill to help inoculate the potato before it even has a chance?
I think that's a good question. I'd like to say that I think there's a lot of angles on soil health that could be beneficial. And so that cover crop, soil health, increasing organic matter, making it pleasant for helpful organisms to be present in the field. I think those are all beneficial, but our trial budget is a little bit smaller. At this time, we don't have the plan to look at that angle. But I do think if we can identify organisms that are beneficial, we could potentially move into looking at whether or not cover crops or certain strategies in the field encourage those same organisms. So rather than having to apply them, we could try to encourage them to be taking up residence in the potato plots already.
On that note, did you have any comment about the recent announcement from McCain's and their regenerative ag strategy?
Yeah, I have. I guess what's interesting is McCain has come out strongly in favor of a regenerative agriculture approach. And to that end, they have provided scholarships to the University of Lethbridge. So there are 6 scholarships available for 2 years. And those scholarships are to fund projects that are aimed at kind of a regenerative ag or sustainable agriculture type project. So those, as far as I know, have been awarded. Unfortunately, those kind of were awarded just before we were able to attract funding. So we got to the university just a little bit too late. But the good news is they have a commitment to that, and they are helping sponsor as well a sustainable agriculture course at the University of Lethbridge this fall. So it's a graduate level course, and we're permitting senior undergraduates to participate as well. And those that course, we're going to try to cover some of these unique angles. And to do that, we'd like to take a solutions approach. We want to have, instead of villainizing agriculture or having people just dwell on the problems that face agriculture, we want to identify that there are some solutions already being adopted by industry, including McCain and others, and new solutions on the horizon. So things like the biobeds that Farming Smarter is working with, and sustainable packaging, and manure utilization and things like that. So we've got a few guest speakers every week of the course. We hope to have a guest speaker, which will limit the teaching I have to do, which is great. And we're going to have students do case studies. So McCain is going to be one of the speakers in our course, and they are one of the funders. So I'm quite excited to work with them on that initiative. But it's not new really right now. It seems like many industries are aware of the need to continue to introduce sustainable practices. So I'd have to say producers already use a lot of them. We don't farm the way we did 20 years ago. We certainly don't farm the way we did 50 years ago. Producers are very innovative and progressive, and they adopt new things as they make sense. And we want to highlight some of those adoptions and encourage people in that direction.
Yeah, agreed. I think that we've seen more soil blowing the last couple of years over the winter in particular, and some of those heavy tilled soils. So the more we can do to reduce the amount of that happening out there is definitely in the right direction. Okay, we have another question in the chat from Lindsay. How many samples do you need, and what's the best way to collect and package them?
So we're looking for 100 to 200 samples this year. And the best, we want them to get here so that we can still identify what they were. So ideally, if you take a tuber and a plant and it goes into sort of a paper bag that will absorb some moisture, and then in a plastic bag, we need contact information for who dropped it off. Ideally, if you know anything else about the location of the sample, that would be beneficial. So the variety that's being grown, the field location, we will anonymize the data. And then they can be dropped off in the boot rack area of the Lethbridge Research Center on the north side of the building. So there's a door that's unlocked, and I just recently found it, and you can leave them on the boot rack there and let Larry or his technician or myself or Jonathan know, and someone will take it in the building and process the sample. So we are looking for 1 to 200. Obviously, we could get swamped with samples very easily, but we're also afraid of not getting any. So if you have samples, feel free to contact me to figure out the best way to get them there. Ideally, if you're sending them from a long distance, it'd be good to have them with an ice pack or something like that. If you're local, I think they could be dropped off before they decay too far. So.
Okay, perfect. So Lee has one that he says is slightly off topic. He's wondering about what happened in the potato world with potato types. When I go to the grocery store, there appear to be all types, good for baking, good for frying, good for mashing. I don't remember seeing this selection a few years ago. Is it just marketing?
Some of both. So always one of the greatest disappointments for me as a potato researcher is that you can't buy the things you can grow. So the best part of being involved in variety evaluation is I have all sorts of interesting potato varieties I could try. Because if you eat your research, no one knows that you did that. So interestingly enough, there are obviously well-known differences in potato varieties, and firms that are releasing new varieties know very well what they're suited for. The barrier seems to be that in the grocery store, there's a produce manager that's less informed. So in the past, they used to carry potato and they kind of resent carrying potatoes. They have to have them, but they don't get excited about them. They take up quite a bit of floor space. They are perishable. They're not maybe sexy like imported mangoes or something like that, but everybody looks for potatoes in the store. And so at one point they market it only by skin type. So if you bought a red potato, it could be a Norland, it could be a Viking, it could be a Chieftain. You don't actually know what it is, it's just red. Well, that's not very descriptive. And obviously there are very big differences between cultivars, but it's convenient for marketing because you don't have to print as many labels on bags and things like that. Also, for people that don't know the difference, maybe it doesn't matter to them. So lately, there's been a bit of a push from the marketing perspective, not to go variety specific by everyone, but to at least categorize them by type. So that is a marketing thing. They're trying to bag mashing types differently from roasting, different from boiling. And the theory is then that when you take it home, you will be able to use it for your intended purpose. So it is kind of a move in that direction, not quite to the point where Europeans do it, where they market by variety in the same way that we market apples here. So it could be done. If you are in the grocery store and you look for the little potato company stuff, they market both ways. They do have some that are marketed by variety name. They also have some that are just marketed by kind of a category, a type. So they want their product to be consistent. They want you to be satisfied when you take it home. So there is some changes to our marketing of potatoes, but you still can't buy a specific variety unless you go right to the grower. So if you go to a farmer's market or a How to Write colony, you might be able to get a variety by name. Otherwise, you're taking your chances with skin color.
Okay. I have a question for you as far as the endophytes. Is it a foliar application? Could you put it in with the irrigation? Is it timing specific or just general?
Yeah, very good question. It's one of the things that we're hoping to figure out this year. One of the things I envisioned is I have worked with plants in the tissue culture phase, and we thought if it was possible to introduce endophytes in tissue culture and have the plant take them up, we would be dealing with the smallest population of potato plants, and then if that would persist for several years, we could kind of vaccinate them against blackleg in the field. We don't know if it would persist in the plant or even if they would take it up. We've also considered soil drench, which is what they do with a lot of the studies, and that would not be appropriate at the commercial level because we have way too many fields of potatoes. But in a greenhouse where there's a protected environment and potting soil and a limited area, it might be possible to introduce them with a soil drench. So those are kind of things that we're considering. So we have to see what works. Soil amendments might also work, but again, we're going to try to work with the smallest acreage possible and see if we can get those benefits to confer into the commercial crop rather than trying to treat the commercial crop.
Interesting. Does anyone else have any additional questions? By all means, raise your hand, turn your camera on, or type it into the chat. We have a little bit of time left, so I guess I'll ask another question of you. Michele, at the beginning of your presentation, you were commenting on, your funding a little bit dependent on Alberta agriculture. What do you see happening as far as, with all the new changes and structure that's going on?
So this is some swag, scientific wild ass guess, or maybe just speculation. But right now, ownership of the research station still is retained by the Alberta government. And particularly, I believe it's Alberta Infrastructure that owns the land. The tenant used to be Alberta Agriculture, and in some cases still is. Like in Brooks, there are still Alberta Agriculture employees there. There is equipment that belongs to Alberta Agriculture that's present on site. So one of the challenges in transitioning the research to post-secondary institutions like Lethbridge College is that they can't do the research without access to the irrigation infrastructure, access to the equipment. And then there's weird spin-offs, like maybe to have the equipment, it'd be nice to have fuel on site or access to the shop to maintain it, air up tires, things like that. So we've been working with them, me kind of behind the scenes, asking questions through the college, Alberta Agriculture. At this time, they have committed, as far as I know, to seeing this project through, but it ends in 2022. That's our last crop year. We write project reports up in 2023. So there's a new framework, a new growing forward framework that's being discussed now. And certainly if potato variety evaluation is still considered to be an industry priority, we're hoping there might be another 5-year funding package from the federal government through Canadian Hort Council. But our ability to participate depends heavily on access to that equipment and land and all the go-withs. So we've already found it quite awkward not to have the manpower piece and to have to ask for each piece of equipment as we need it. Could be quite awkward if that land and equipment wasn't available, because there isn't really a ready substitute in place. So the university and the college don't have a land that's independent of the Alberta government right now, and we don't have equipment. So I think the industry needs to be somewhat proactive in encouraging either the government to continue to support the trials or in looking for a suitable alternative, because we have a couple of years before our time runs out.
Yeah, I have to admit, we have also been lobbying to try and get access to land and equipment and all the things that the government no longer wants to do, and had zero luck with that as well. So I wish you all the best.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that wraps up our presentation here with Michele. If anyone has any questions, by all means, reach out to her. I'll put up the QR code for this session as well. So if you're obtaining CCA credits, you can scan the code with your phone and the app. And we will meet back here again at 11 o'clock at the top of the hour. If you want to put your CCA code in the chat, if you don't have the app, by all means do that, and I will submit on your behalf. I will see you at 11 o'clock for our next presentation with Charles and Nolan.